I'm Micah Schweitzer. I'm with WNIN Public Radio here in Evansville. And the way this works is you fill out one of these cards, and many of you, perhaps all of you, have at this point. And you can, when you're called, come up to the microphone, ask your question. You have 2 minutes to make your point and ask your question, and then the legislators have 2 minutes to respond as well. We'll begin with some recaps, quick 2-minute recaps from the legislators as well. Since this is the final Meet Your Legislators, I'm just going to get on a little soapbox briefly, if you'll indulge me. We do want to say a big thanks, first of all, to all of you for coming out. It's a tremendous thing that you come out and engage with your elected leaders each month like this, and obviously you're a very important part of the equation. So thank you for coming today and month after month in many of your cases. A big thanks also to the sponsors who make this event possible: Evansville Teachers Association, United Neighborhoods of Evansville, the League of Women Voters of Southwest Indiana, Valley Watch, Teamsters Local 215, the library, of course, the Plumbers and Steamfitters Local 136, and the Isaac Walton League. And since this is our final chance to do so, let's give them a round of applause and thank them. And finally, I do want to just point out that if you look at the long arc of history, it doesn't take much looking to see that representative democracy is not the default setting for human governance. And so what we have here is quite special. And what you're part of and what you're doing today is a privilege. And so, as I said before, it's thanks to you that we can do this, but it's also thanks to these legislators who take time from their busy schedules to engage with you directly and to be here month after month. And so before they say anything that you might disagree with on a political level, let's thank them all for their service and for their time. And I think that gets us into actually starting the program, and we can begin. I don't know who wants to start with just a 2-minute. You want to start on that end? Sure. Okay, so we'll just get 2-minute summaries of what's been happening at the State House.
Good morning, and thank you for coming. I just want to say Representative Crouch would like to be here this morning. However, her mother was taken to the hospital this morning, so she can't be with us. So if you would keep her and her family in your prayers, I'd appreciate it. So I am Wendy McNamara. I'm House District 76, which is Posey County in the west side of Evansville and North Park area. It's been a busy month since we've been with you last. I had several bills, that have gone through the process, and 2 that have been signed into law. One will be signed into law next week, as well as unanimous out of both the House and the Senate. So pretty excited about that, and had a bill signing on the Blue Alert, which is like the Amber Alert system, but for law enforcement. For me, the last couple of weeks have been very exciting. I was able to honor a man named Jim Davis. He was a World War II vet, and he is 92 years old, fought in the Pacific, and we brought him to the House floor and honored him for his service. And the thing about Jim is you will find him at the West Side Bob Evans any morning eating breakfast, but every day he wears a Marine hat and a Marine tie to remember those that didn't make it back. It was a great pleasure to honor Jim for his sacrifices that he made on our behalf so that we can have these town halls and these meetings like this. Also, yes, amen to Jim and all those others that have served for us. And I also honored or recognized Prater Willie Month. In our community, we have Jacobs Village for adults with disabilities, but we also have folks that are still struggling to try to make it through. And Prader Willie is a disease in which somebody never feels full. It's a genetic disability as well as a developmental disability. And they need a special home when they get adults that isn't necessarily compliant with the ADA. So I'm trying to draw attention to this particular disease. We do have community members that have this, and their needs are different from other adults with disabilities. And so I did a resolution honoring or recognizing Prader Willie. And a good friend of mine, Patrick Fernetton, he's a police officer. His daughter has this. Her name's Mickey. And next Saturday will be Guns N' Hoses number 6. And the funds from Guns and Hoses go to local residents with disabilities and the hope someday of building what's called Hope Village for folks in Indiana with Prader-Willi syndrome. So those are the two things that have touched my heart the last few weeks, and please keep your thoughts and minds of all those who are around us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Tom Washburn. I represent District 64. District 64 is a whopper. It stretches all the way from Wheatland, Indiana, which is just outside Washington, Indiana. It includes half of Knox County, basically the southern half, excluding the city of Vincennes. All of Gibson County, 3 townships over in Pike County, which is roughly, if you drew a straight line south of Petersburg, everything west of that. All of Gibson County has 3 townships in Posey County, which includes Cynthiana, Poseyville, and Griffin. And in Vanderburgh County, I've got about 40% of the landmass, which roughly on the, if you're on the west side of 41, you drew a line between Highland School and Resurrection School over to Marks Road. Everything kind of north and west of that is in. On the east side of 41, it's basically north of Boonville, New Harmony Road, with the exception of a little bump in there that Suzanne Crouch's district comes in. I am a freshman in the House, and it's pretty interesting time. We're down to the last 2 weeks. I don't know if you have any NASCAR fans in here, but you know when they're on the track and they're 4 wide on the straightaway, but only 3 can make it through a turn. That's where we're at, and we're in that way on a lot of different issues with the Senate. We're on those issues with the governor, and it's going to be an exciting last couple of laps because something's got to give, and it'll be very fascinating. It's been very interesting to see the games that are being played all over the place. I had played the Washington game for a long time as chief of staff for a couple different congressmen. This is a different game. It's a little bit different, but it's very interesting. We're doing 25 bills a day, so I could try to highlight some of those for you, but it would be mind-boggling. And a lot of those issues are changing daily, and so it's almost impossible to speak on some of them because you don't have current information, and it becomes difficult. But I think the highlight of the whole week was watching a representative present an amendment all singing it. Now that was an unusual occurrence in the House. She got up, and it had to do with musical therapy, and she bolted out ladies of the House or men of the House, and proceeded with her amendment, to which the Speaker of the House replied, are there any further amendments? And when they took the votes, the entire place sang yes and yes or no, kind of thing. I can't sing worth a hooey, so don't look at that. But that representative was Suzanne Crouch, which made it all the more amazing. So that was the highlight of the week for me.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'd add that I hope that gets on YouTube somewhere because it really was a lot of fun. I looked up and I just couldn't believe when I saw these. First of all, Suzanne is tall.
We were all asleep anyway.
Yeah, Suzanne is tall, and I guess that our mic isn't tall enough. And what was the comment the speaker said? Well, she said, "Well, I'll take my shoes off," and he said, "Yes, I'd just make you 6'2". It was nice to have that levity because it gets a little tense now. I'm Gail Reekin, and I'm District 77. Have a good part of Evansville, downtown, southeast side, east side, and with the redistricting, I shoot up toward and include that Cedar Hall district up there. So it's a nice L kind of thing. I have out there sort of legislation moving through the Indiana General Assembly. Just a few notes on things that I've been involved in, and one in which Representative McNamara took leadership on, and that was the tactical medicine, which I guess you are close to getting
It'll be signed sometime next week.
Sometime next week. And then some other issues of interest. One of them was heard this last week, and it was on child care regulation. He was talking about some of the difficult things that have happened at the 11th hour, and we've had this conversation with a couple folks out there who are familiar. And that legislation changed a lot, and we didn't go far enough. It was a bill that was really going to be was going to end a lot of the inconsistencies that are out there in child care. But at least it's a step forward and making progress. The others that will be on for third reading, which it might be an interesting day to tune in if you can get on the internet. It'll start at 10 o'clock time. It's 11 o'clock 10 o'clock in Indianapolis, 9 o'clock here. But it will be very interesting on Monday. The child care regulation, there's a utilities bill, 349. Some of the things, the reason I mention this is that what we've seen is where the cities and counties have been very strapped because of the tax caps. They're finding ingenious ways to, let's say, bring in more revenue. And I will say legitimately to try to spend their revenue smarter. So 305 is one of those. And it'll be interesting what's happened. I was able to get an amendment in to kind of pull it down a little bit, but it's still a very popular bill, and I think we'll have success. We'll see 510, which is syngas, Senate Bill 1, which is the school resource, and that's the guns in the schools, which I'm sure you're going to talk about, and the gaming bill, which has been all over the place in the last week, and it's hard to tell what's going to happen with any one of those in these final days.
Thanks.
Good morning. Appreciate all of you coming out on this beautiful sunny Saturday morning. I'm Vanita Becker, and I represent Senate District 50, which includes portions of Vandenberg and Warwick counties. And we have been very busy. I had a resolution this week recognizing Alcoa on its 125th year of operation in the state of Indiana. They employ, and Senator Toms joined me in that resolution, they employ 3,200 people in the state of Indiana at 3 different plants, Lafayette, LaPorte, and Newburgh, but Newburgh is by far their largest employer, employment of people. And they also have, since the beginning of their foundation, they have contributed to the state, to communities, over $550 million. To not-for-profits, to education, sustainability, environmental causes, and so we were very pleased to have all of them up. In addition, Senator Toms and I also recognize Mater Dei girls and Memorial girls for their state championships, and we were very pleased to have them up. It was fun. 2 of my bills have been signed. We had a bill signing with the governor on Wednesday, it was Wednesday of this week, to sign. Many of you may have followed the Matthew Barhart. Matthew is a 13-year-old who had contacted me about his inability to referee youth soccer when he was 12. He wanted to referee, and up to that time, they had hired some children or let them volunteer at the age of 10, but they found out that they were violating state child labor laws. So Matthew did all this research and brought it to my attention and asked me last year to file this bill, but it was too late because he didn't send it to me till the end of February, and last year was a short session. So it ended in the middle of March. So I went back this year and filed a bill on behalf of Matthew, but he did most of the work on it. And on Wednesday, we had a signing with the governor, and Matthew has been on YouTube and all over. He's been interviewed by Times Magazine for kids, and it's just been, I think it's been a wonderful experience for Matthew, and it's also a wonderful example of how one person can make a difference in government. So I was very pleased. And also, another bill of mine has passed both houses, Senate Bill 553, which deals with vision screening of children, and it adds the 5th grade to vision screening, because at the age of that age for children, that's an age where their eyes change a lot. If you've ever heard of lazy eye syndrome, those kinds of things come to the forefront. So we added the 5th grade to that vision testing bill. And also Senate Bill 554, which is going into conference committee, and it's a telemedicine, telehealth bill. And I'm very pleased with that. We do have to try to work out some language differences between the House and the Senate, and we'll be going to conference committee next week. The budget bill has passed the Senate. There are differences between the House and the Senate. One of the issues that we as a delegation will be working on is trying to get more adequate funding for USI. USI receives less per pupil reimbursement than any other 4-year residential university in the state. And so we want to try to get them up to at least close to the average statewide appropriation. They receive about $4,200, and the statewide average is $7,700. per student. So you can see that there's a big discrepancy. So, and I think he's telling me my time is up. So thank you so much for coming. Oh, and we also had a resolution. Jim yielded a couple of minutes to me. He yielded to me because we also had, Representative Crouch had, you may know Ben Trockman. Ben was injured and is a paraplegic in a motocross accident when he was 17. He's now 24. And Suzanne and I brought a resolution, and the whole delegation, to ask Congress to look at airplane ability for children or for adults in wheelchairs, because Ben wanted to try to go to California by plane and could not go because his wheelchair, they could not accommodate his electronic wheelchair. And so he had to drive for 3 days with his parents to California. And so we're asking Congress to look at the safety issues and the ability to make handicap accessibility for those wheelchairs in planes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say it's been a pleasure working in the Senate with Senator Becker. It really has, and I do appreciate all that she does. You know, I think we started off with, like, both houses had something in the neighborhood of maybe 700 bills initially. They've been weeded out. This is a matrix of the bills that survived so far. There's still more to be added to this list. It's almost the size of a phone book. And I just point this out, folks, because we hear so much about 2 or 3 topics, which are always important. That's what usually appears in the paper. And if you want to look at this after the meeting, you're welcome to go through this, because there are so many subject matters that are brought before these houses that concern you and affect your lives, that never get in the newspaper, never gets reported, but they're very important issues. And it takes a lot of time to hear each of these bills and how they make it through the committees. I think it's weeded down to about 230 or so bills per house now that it's made it this far, but I just want to point this out. My district is District 49, which is all of Posey, portions of Vandenberg, and portions of Gibson County. This year, some of the bills I had introduced were amended into other bills. For example, I had a bill that addressed the issue of consolidation, city-county consolidations, and it gives that measure would give everybody a equal level playing field in future consolidation efforts. And that bill was amended into a Senate version of Randy Head's bill, which I think is passed. It may be over in the House yet, it hasn't come back, but also I had a bill that I introduced addressing fraudulent tax returns. In particular, it was illegal. Immigrants have been filing fraudulent tax returns, but nevertheless, in that measure too was amended into Senator Hirschman's bill, so that measure is still being processed, and it would give the Department of Revenue the ability to work with other agencies like the BMV and other agencies, so that maybe we can crack down on how many people are gaming the state of Indiana in fraudulent tax returns. I had a resolution that I passed for the state police. They had come to me about this, to name portions of Highway I-69 and I-64 in honor of 3 officers, 2 state troopers, Trees and Officer Hatfield, who were killed in the line of duty, and Officer Dino, a Oak Cliff City police officer who was also killed in the line of duty. This is something they've been trying for several years, and it was really happy that this year we got it done, and so I was happy to be a part of that. And I got a measure on drones. I introduced this is back in last June. Nobody was talking about drones back then. The bill didn't get a hearing because they didn't think it was a matter that we should be involved with, and then in January, this thing surfaced, and now every day in the paper there's issues. States all across the country, cities and towns, are adopting resolutions and laws and ordinances because it is a industry that is here to stay, and it's important. It has very a lot of beneficial aspects of it, but there's this potential for abuse with respect to privacy and security and safety, and so that's why we're having a summer study on this, and I'm happy to have that accomplished as well. And is my time about up? Okay, I lost some of my time, but that's fine. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you all. We'll try to get through as many of these as we can now, and we'll leave enough time for everyone to have a minute or so at the end as well, just to cap things off. The first order of business, thank you from United Neighborhoods, and Carolyn Stagg would like to come up and say a few words. So is the next step lowering the voting age to 12? Okay.
Is it on? Yeah, okay. My name is Carolyn Stagg. I'm the president-elect of United Neighborhoods of Evansville. United Neighborhoods has about 43 organized neighborhood associations within the city of Evansville. So if you're part of one of these neighborhood associations, I thank you for all the work you do. I also want to thank you guys for coming here and for letting United Neighborhoods be a sponsor. So I just wanted you to know that. I'm going to give you a brochure. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sure.
Thank you. I've seen a couple things interesting happen with the neighborhood associations. First of all, their influence on issues at the state level. One of them was the meth issue. The neighborhoods really got behind that and made a difference in terms of numbers and an impact on the state level. But there has been another issue that kind of emanated from this area too, which was a negative, what shall I say, a negative summary of what neighborhood associations could mean. And it was where one person took charge. I don't know if you saw it in the paper. And this made, this became very much a topic in Indianapolis in a couple of meetings I was in. And they're going to have a summer study committee on the value of neighborhood associations. I think that neighborhood associations are the building blocks of our communities, and I've said that for years, and we desperately need to keep them strong, and we have some strong members here. So I sincerely hope that we get the information to you so that this summer you're up there talking about the value of our neighborhood associations. Thank you.
Great. Okay, let's go on to a question on the Common Core, and this is Brenda Mills has this question.
I'll start this off on a good thing here. I'm going to give my reasons for my question first, if you don't mind. Parents' rights to choose the education system they want for their children is coming under more and more government attacks. When Obama nationalized student loans, he said that if the student wanted to go into a field such as engineering, and the government felt we had enough engineers, the student would be encouraged to pick another field of education. I've been listening to him talking about needing more children taught the necessary skills to work in factories and garages, that we need to start teaching our children these skills earlier, starting at 4 years of age. The carrot given is that having the kids in school earlier would alleviate their daycare costs for the parents. We've heard Hillary Clinton say it takes a village. We've listened to a woman last week state that our children do not belong to us, but to the community. I understand now that we have, and you mentioned State Bill 305, with amended language reference churches, child care ministries to be placed under the control of Family Social Services. In Illinois, and I've known this for several years, the teachers union and in other states has mounted a movement to force homeschooled children to be taught by certified teachers. I would like to know why, and I don't know who does and who does not care for Common Core, why any of you would think the government-controlled curriculum, Common Core, and everything that will come with it is good for Indiana.
Okay, who wants to take that?
Sure. I'm not an educator, so maybe they could speak to that point, but reading through Common Core and listening to both sides, I like Glenda Ritz's approach, which she feels like it needs to be evaluated over the next year. She feels that we need to slow down the process instead of adopting it, if I'm remembering that correctly. And I do like that attitude because I can see why people are supportive and I can see why people are negative against the Common Core. So I'm hoping that they will slow it down and we'll see Common Core evaluated over this next year. Regarding 305, which you mentioned, one of the thing that really, I guess, upset me, and I thought was not in the best interest of the children, and said so from the floor, was that this summer there were folks from all different disciplines who sat around a table for meeting after meeting and came up with basic assurances that children were going to receive adequate protection for health and safety. And that was whether it was in the home or whether it was in a daycare center or a registered child care ministry. The way it ended up, everything was thrown out except for those entities that accept government vouchers, and that's a program. My basic contention is children need to be protected in whatever environment for health and safety. And it isn't a religious issue, it's a child protection issue. And what happened is that one of the gentlemen who was, I guess, not part of this, I don't know what happened, got very upset and said things on the radio that were not true about the bill, and I guess those things are out there. But hopefully the bill will go through in its present form, and folks can gather once more this summer and talk without all the emotion and that about things that are in the best interest for children. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You know, I'm going to come at this as a slightly different approach, and that is that I'm not an expert enough to tell you whether Common Core are good standards or not. Okay, that's not my line of work. I've heard Indiana had better standards before they looked at Common Core. But I can tell you that philosophically, I have a really hard time with the government at the Washington level or at Indianapolis telling us what kind of standards need to be adopted in our local schools.
Yes.
Because I think our counties are different. And, you know, this isn't a Republican-Democrat thing. You know, in Washington, D.C., the nationalization of such things was really advanced rapidly by George Bush II when they had the No Child Left Behind Act. And the tension is always, how do you fund public education without requiring accountability? And I understand, I get that. I understand why the President of the United States thought it was important to set up standards that everyone would be accountable to in order to be responsible steward of the public's money. And I understand why the people in Indianapolis have thought that for the last several sessions. You know, I'm a new guy because I don't have any baggage on this regard. But, you know, I just don't get it. I wasn't elected to be on the school board. I'm tired of this kind of approach to things. So no, I don't like Common Core, but it isn't because of the standards set forth. It's because they're being imposed from somewhere else. And unfortunately, you know, bills like No Child Left Behind tag a lot of federal money to what we do, and there's a price to be paid for many things. I don't know that there's any money coming with Common Core. But that's one of the dynamics that's often in play about, you know, you can hardly get rid of these things once you start them because you're going to have to take a fiscal hit for it. That the Bill 305 that you're referring to was amended in the House. And what the House said, and they were not unreasonable standards, a lot of them. I mean, it looked pretty reasonable. This is the standards on if you're going to run a preschool, basically, right? You're going to have a preschool. And these standards were put forth, and some of them, you know, most of them seem pretty reasonable to me when I look through them. But the concern arose that if you don't take federal money, you know, if you don't take dollars for your preschool that comes from taxpayers, why would you be subject to these kinds of things? And I think that it was wise to change the bill to make it such that if you don't accept dollars, you've got some leeway. And maybe it does need to be studied again and taken a look at to see maybe there are some things that aren't already in place that need to be. But there's enough of me that favors liberty and freedom that says that if you keep yourself off the federal dole or the state dole, that we're Americans and our ancestors fought wars so that we can do things on our own without having somebody looking over us every second of every day. And so there you go.
Well, we had House Bill 1427, I think was the bill number. I'm not sure. It was in the Senate this week. And it in that bill, which I supported, it would remove implementing Common Core after June of this year. And just like Representative Washburn talked about, at the end of this meeting, I hope I have enough time to talk about House Bill 1579. And this here is an illustration of what we're dealing with, where the federal government has gotten to the point where they are real good at blackmailing and strong-arming and threatening our states that if you want money, you will do as we say. And 1579 was a classic example, and I hope I have enough time to explain what that was about. Because you need to know that we have a state legislature that has the backbone to stand up sometimes against this federal government. In fact, in that bill there, the chairman of the committee asked me to go on the attack, and I was glad he asked me that, because the federal government is doing these things, and they do it with education. They've been successful at doing this for a long time. And I am tired of the federal government dictating policy that the state have to dance to if we're going to get our own money back. And that's what it boils down to. And citizens are going to have to come to the realization we can continue to be subservient to this federal government, or we can make a stand and regain our sovereignty, decide for ourselves, we're adults in this state, we can decide for ourselves what policies and what laws we want and how we will conduct ourselves. Whether it's education, whether it's criminal codes, whatever the matter might be. For me, I'm tired of it. This is one of the reasons I ran for office. I'm tired of a dictatorial federal government 700 miles from here telling us here in Indiana what we will do to get our own money back. And I just want you to know that I'm proud to be in a legislature where we have a lot of people who are willing to stand up to this federal government. And we did that with this 1579. So I hope I have enough time later to explain that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'm the resident expert on education. That's usually what they defer to me at the State House for. So, unfortunately, education bills are everywhere. We have a tough time getting away from it. I think if we were to look at the number of bills that are filed on particular subject matter, I think education would win. And to be honest with you, so much is stuffed into them that there might be a section you could support, and then the rest of it is just not good for schools. When it comes to Common Core, I've been through, I've helped write state standards for social studies. First of all, I want to be clear, Common Core is just English and just math, just those two content areas, okay? The rest is still being used state standards. So social studies, science, all those still use Indiana standards that have been developed and written by Indiana teachers. Common Core was developed, and this is where the difference comes in between Indiana standards and federal standards of Common Core, or whatever you want to call it. They were written primarily, Common Core was written primarily by college professors with some input by teachers in K-12, primarily for the gaps that they felt were missing when students were graduating high school and going on to college. It's a response primarily to the perception that the United States is failing or falling behind the rest of the world in math and English. So I think that's where the Common Core movement came from. It was primarily a governor movement. Personally, I feel like a yo-yo. One day we have this standard, one day we have that standard. We are just beginning to implement Common Core in math and English in K-3 here in Evansville or in Indiana this year. My school, knowing that we were headed that direction, moved 3 years ago. And for me, the hard part about this is being that yo-yo. And on this particular issue, I want to do with what my teachers want to do. And I would tend to agree, taking time, looking and seeing what the true temperature is out there as far as what the teachers want on this particular issue. There's been a lot of time invested in professional development. There's been a lot of time and money invested in textbooks. I think the EVSC is over $1.5 million in textbooks to accommodate to Common Core, and probably just as much in professional development. But with that said, I think it's really one of those things that to get the pulse of the teachers is the important part. you know, I'm of the mindset, you know, although Common Core leaves out a lot, there isn't the restriction that teachers can't put more back in. They can add those things that are missing. But my concern becomes is we're always trying to chase and catch up to the other guy's perception, which isn't necessarily true because we're not ever comparing apples to apples. People in other countries educate in silo. Kids down different paths as far as what they are. We educate the masses. We educate everyone. And you know, I'm inclined just to sit back and see what develops as far as looking into it, what our teachers in Indiana want, and go from there.
Thank you.
I think you asked about 3 questions in one there. But I think the Common Core, we did have a bill in the Senate that passed, and it's over in the House, and now we have a House bill that's been amended to slow down the process, to have hearings, so that really the problem was that Tony Bennett unilaterally adopted Common Core for Indiana. And he did this a few years ago. And so the legislature wasn't involved in the issue, wasn't asked, and neither was the public. So I think it's good that we slow down and take input from teachers, from parents, from community leaders throughout the state. And that's really what the bill calls for. Now, as far as regulation for child care ministries, that's something that has been, I think, as Gail Rican indicated, the bill's been only if you take vouchers, so only if you take government funding. I mean, personally, I think there ought to be some minimum health and safety standards, regardless of where your child is, that you know that there's smoke alarms, smoke detectors, that they can get out in the case of a fire. And really what brought this to a head was we had a child that drowned in a baptismal in Indianapolis in a church daycare ministry last year or the year before. And there was, they also go around and inspect periodically. Even though they're not regulated, they can inspect just for basic health. And they found roaches in lots of these daycare centers. They found like one caregiver to 18 children. One caregiver to 18 children. And yet parents believed that because these were, quote, religious daycare, they ought to be okay. So they took their word for it. And so all the bill's trying to do is get basic health and safety standards for all of our children. And I think that that's critical, whether you have your children at a church daycare ministry or a private, especially if they're taking public vouchers for daycare. And they want the money, and if they do that, they ought to take some of the basic health and safety requirements. And so, but you have, sometimes there's one particular lobbyist that gets on the radio and TV and raises money for himself, basically, by distorting what's in bills. So I just tell you that that's really what it's about.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a question now about the USI interchange, and this is a question from Michael Lockhart.
Michael.
You ought to know how I'm going to Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to speak today, and especially thank you for being down here. I enjoy every time that I get to come up to Indianapolis how responsive our legislators are to community concerns. I have said this at the state level and on several levels that I feel that Southern Indiana has by far the best delegation of anywhere in the state, and I dare anybody else in the state to argue me on that one. And we thank you for your service, very definitely. I have really kind of a twofold question to ask. One is on the USI interchange, and what I'm talking about is on the southern end of the new University Parkway, the interchange that is directly related to USI. As all of you know, that interchange was originally built with county funds, and I found out from Russ Lloyd here just a while back that we actually made the final bond payment on that in January of 2010. I remember going to that school when that interchange wasn't there. And one of the good things, bad things is that the University Parkway is now completed all the way to Diamond Avenue. I believe we have Representative McNamara to thank for getting NDOT to suddenly develop a brain and put a flashing light at that particular intersection, so we're hoping that will go in very soon. What I'd like to urge is, and I know it's too late for this particular year, but for future year, that interchange is woefully inadequate because we have a jewel on the west side of Evansville, which is the University of Southern Indiana, which Senator Becker and I were just talking earlier. We actually graduated from USI the same year in 1994, which is kind of an interesting thing. And it is something that serves the university, but now it is serving more than just the university. It is serving the entire west side of Evansville from Diamond Avenue down to the Lloyd Expressway, State Road 62. I've talked to the people in Mount Vernon and Posey County. They're taking a great amount of advantage to it. So we'd like to see that in future years that there be something done that we could find a way to fund redeveloping or reconfiguring that interchange so that it is safer and that it continues to serve the university, but also to serve the entire regional area. Because the 2035 MPO plan says that it's going to be connected to I-64 one of these days, and then everything's going to be interesting. The handout that I gave you is the concern that, again, I know it's too late for this year, but for future years, if you notice I bolded section 6 on here. This has to do with rezoning changes. And what we'd like to see happen is for this to be modified so that it is not taken advantage of as it is now. In the past, anytime somebody brought a rezoning request before the Area Plan Commission, they normally would discuss it in advance with the neighbors. What's happening now is they're bringing redevelopment proposals with no use in developments, and so the neighbors are hearing these things for the first time when it comes up, and it's a shock. And we'd like to see that restricted a little bit more. And the final thing, before he throws me out up here on my time, is that right now under state law, anybody who files for a rezoning only has 10 days to notify the abutting neighbors. 10 days is nowhere adequate for neighbors to suddenly get a surprise that, wait a minute, they're going to put a 200-acre rezoning, Walmart, Target, whatever, nothing against those guys, but 10 days is way too short of a time, and we would like to see the state increase that to a minimum of 30 days or more, but a minimum of 30 days in advance, so that way neighbors have adequate time not only to discuss it with the developer and amongst themselves, but if they need outside help, that they can contact the their neighborhood association and their elected leaders, and it gives them a lot more time to do that.
I
And so
have to
thank
cut
you.
you off here, yeah.
All right, thank you for your time.
First of all, this has nothing to do with your question, Michael, but I want to thank you very much. He came up and testified on behalf of House Bill 1111, which was the tactical medical, and I truly believe his testimony was the most impactful of the testimony we had, and being able to present the need for our police officers with tactical medical training to be able to perform those life-saving measures. So thank you, Michael. Yeah, he's got a pin. So, he doesn't give himself enough credit, but I believe his testimony made all the difference in the world. But to answer your question, we've talked about the interchange right there, and I've given you my response. I've had a lot of discussions with NDOT. Their desire with NDOT is to make sure we complete it all the way to 64 and spend the money there first. I understand that with the traffic flow, it doesn't help us if the interchange isn't adequate to make sure people can get in and out of there safely. So we're kind of found ourselves in a situation of, do we extend the parkway all the way out and leave this other for the second part? And NDOT is trying to work through those particular circumstances. And through our discussions, I can't really divulge it because I think it's premature to do a lot of that discussion out here without having the discussion there. But I would say in our future, it's looking good for the expansion. The second part will definitely be the interchange there. As far as the rezoning part, I will look at your information there and see what we can do. Thanks, bye.
Michael, I just want to let you know, I've got a meeting set up at 11 o'clock Monday morning with Abby Weingart with NDOT on this here. And I know some years ago this was brought up about this project, and the interchange is a problem the way it was designed. And now with the flow of traffic it already has, and it's going to only get a little worse, more crowded. I know they talked years ago about a 4-leaf clover, which that looks like that would have been a fit, but I just want to let you know that I'm taking an interest in this too, and I will explain to Abby what we're looking at down here and see what they can do to help us on this problem.
I'd like some clarification. Michael, I'd like some clarification on the rezoning and because it was common practice that there was communication, and it was required when folks gave their testimony before the Plan Commission. And I think what you're telling me is things are going to a point where they have the use and development commitments that they're developing with the review, and there's and the testimony is limited?
No, what it is that the developer that's presenting the rezoning, when they file the rezoning, they are filing it with absolutely no use and developments. And the first time many of the neighbors see the use and developments is actually the night of the hearing. So they don't know ahead of time that what is going to happen, that there's going to be any restrictions. And what it is that the developers are taking advantage of this new law that says, oh, well, we can actually put one in at the time of the hearing. So what's happening is neighbors don't even know what's going to happen with the use and development ahead of time.
So, and just for this, so what has to happen is there has to be a clarification about the required time from the point that the use and development commitment is filed somewhere. We'd have to have filing and the time that it's presented.
Yes.
That's where you need your 30 days.
And I have some stuff that
Okay.
I will write up and share.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Wendy's waving at me over here.
Oh, Michael, I just want to, on the topic of the tactical emergency medical teams, thank you for your testimony in the Senate Public Policy Committee on House Bill 11. I've really appreciated you being there and bringing all the other support. You're a shining example of what it means to provide public input to the General Assembly, and we appreciate it. I haven't really had much information on this, but certainly be happy to take a look at this. We all want it to be developed right and with as much public input as possible.
Well, Wendy and I are over here looking because we have some vague recollection of that there may have been some provisions impacting this came through the House on one of the bills, and we're going to check and see. But you know, when you're doing 30 bills a day and you got some of those bills are fairly substantial, it's hard to remember all the specific provisions. But we both have sort of this fleeting memory here, so we're going to see what we can find. Maybe by the end of the
And I'll
time
get that
here.
from you after then. I would appreciate that.
If I might. The bill I'm trying to remember, it might be a Senate bill, it might be a House bill for all I know, I don't know. What it does is require transparencies in contracts when people are buying properties. Like, for example, if you live in a subdivision that's been added onto or subdivided, it might apply. So I'll have to look at that, and I'll have to find out where that went to. So we'll see if that applies.
But you know, I'm dreaming bills these days too. So I mean, it could be wrong.
I remember which committee I was on. So.
That bill is of interest, and I'll tell you one thing about it. It has to go back to neighborhood associations and commitments that are made regarding covenants that are on property. We all buy properties, and we don't necessarily know about covenants. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Maybe I'll think of it as we go through here. And so someone bought a property, and you get, in this particular situation, had given up their right of remonstrance against the development of a water line. And it was in the covenant for that entire subdivision. So, I bet maybe there is something in there. There would be a good place to add something, guys, if you can get it in there. But it is interesting what can happen and you aren't realizing.
Yes. Thank you. All right.
621.
Well, you can dig into this more afterwards. Let's move on to a question now about Senate Bill 510. This is the Peabody Amendment, and John Blair has that question.
Yeah, I heard somebody kind of incredulously, the Peabody Amendment. Well, let me explain how it came to that.
In 2 minutes.
Doggone microphone.
It was, when this bill was originally introduced, it provided savings guarantees for consumers for the 30-year duration of the contract that the state has to buy all the gas from the Leucadia plant in Rockport. And now all that's gone. It's gone because the head of the Senate Utilities Committee, James Merritt, who also in his private job works for Indiana Rail Company, which will transport the coal from the mine, probably the Bear Run mine up by Linton, to Rockport. It was stripped of all the consumer savings language and sent to the House. And in the House, Representative Ubelor, who works for Peabody Coal Company, stripped the bill of all its consumer protections. And it passed in a very bizarre kind of House maneuver on I think it was on Thursday, where they called it a divided House, and all they did was count votes. So nobody knows who voted for anything, although I think that we're figuring out who voted for the Peabody Amendment. Basically, this Leucadia deal requires a federal loan guarantee of probably $4.5 billion. It required the state to come in and be its only customer, and the state in turn is forcing Indiana consumers to pay for all the losses. And then, frankly, this price of this gas, this syngas that will come out of here, is probably approximating 200% to 300% more than the price of natural gas. So you're going to have to pay a significant premium so that Peabody can sell coal to transport on the Indiana Railroad to Rockport, so a New York investment firm can make out like a bandit. Why the state's even involved in this, competing in the private sector, is beyond me. But nevertheless, where are the consumer protections? 30 years. They say, well, we'll give you the site. Well, that's only going to be a Superfund site. That plant won't last for 30 years. And it's in a town called Rockport, Indiana, which is already one of the most polluted places on earth, putting out more toxic pollution from two industries, AK Steel and the Rockport Power Plant, than New York City, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Indianapolis, Seattle, Los Angeles, and San Diego combined. 2,100 people live in Rockport. This is ridiculous.
All right. We have to understand. I don't know if I'm on or not. Okay. John, a lot of the concerns that you raise could have validly been addressed in 2009 and some of those earlier times. I wasn't in the legislature when they set this thing up, okay? But I've come to understand what it is. And I think there's a whole bunch of misinformation about what's going on, okay? The way this thing was set up to work, and this is going to take have a time sticking to time limits.
2 minutes because this is his puppy.
It's not my puppy, but I have tried to understand it. Okay, I'm not on the committees, I'm not anything.
He explains it a lot more eloquently than I.
But I know we have to get it right because it impacts a lot of people, and it impacts us in many, many ways. What they did is they created a special section of statute back before I was ever there. And it said that the Indiana Finance Authority, which is really just an arm of the governor for most practical purposes, will be able to enter into a contract to build a one of these coal gasification plants. And that the state would be obligated to purchase that gas at a fixed rate and then resell it, okay? That's what they did over 30 years. They enter into the contract pursuant to the statute, all right? It goes to the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. It gets approved. The utilities that have to implement the contract decided that they didn't like the contract, and maybe for some valid reasons. I'm not trying to pick sides on this. I'm saying, but they decided they didn't like the contract. So they went to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals said no contract. Now, it's on, they've petitioned to transfer to the Indiana Supreme Court, right? If there is a contract, there is very little, if anything. There's nothing that the state can do because of different reasons. We got the Constitution saying you can't do it. And by state statute, it says, if the authority enters into a contract, the state covenants and agrees for the benefit of the parties to the contract, as well as any entity that provides financing to a party to the contract, that the state will not take or permit any action that would impair the contract or otherwise limit, alter, or impair the ability of authority to satisfy its contractual obligations. That is not a great provision to have in your law, but it's there, okay? And what that means is that a deal is a deal. When you enter into the contract, you can't have the government come around and try to change it after it's entered into and the company invests millions of dollars and you have all this stuff going on. The parties recognize that, and the bill coming out of the Senate said, if the court says there's a contract, it's over. There's nothing you can do. But if there's no contract, then maybe there'd be some kind of IURC review, okay? And that's the point that I'm confused on. And I'm confused of why everybody is so worked up about the IURC review, because if there is no contract, because the court has said there is no contract to be reviewed, okay? So if there is no contract, what would have to happen is for the IFA to enter into a new contract. And the IFA said they're not interested in doing that now, okay? So what was before the House was the Senate bill, and when it came over, it said, review the contract. No, if the court says there is no contract, it would be reviewed. Why, I don't understand this, okay? But it says it's going to be reviewed. And it had a whole bunch of consumer protections and different things in there that would be the standards upon review. But, so the coal company guy, Peabody amendment, if you want to call it that, Matt Hubler introduced an amendment and said, I'll put up with a review, I'll have a review, but it's got to be fast and it's got to be quick because of the way this thing works. And he may be thinking about, if we impair that contract, we're going to be sued. All right? So it called for a review, and it was just a lighter review, basically. It came up for a vote. It was a voice vote. We have voice votes all the time on Second Amendment reading. It's just very common. And more voice votes than recorded votes on those. Mm-hmm. And the speaker couldn't tell who voted. It was a call for the ayes, aye. Call for the nays, nay. Can't tell. He says, in those situations, it's not some big, crazy procedure and mysterious thing. It was just simply the speaker couldn't tell, and at that point you call for a division, and you ask for those who vote one way to stand up, and they go through and count them. Then they ask for those who voted the other way to stand up, and they go through and count those, and it simply carries the day. It's a very common practice. Nothing undercurrent, nothing mysterious. All right? So what we are really looking at right now is if there's a contract, if you don't like it, we're stuck with it. If you like it, you love it. Okay? I mean, that's where we're at. If there is no contract, we're not going to see another contract to be reviewed. All right? I don't know, and I just keep hearing it's going to kill it. It's not going to kill it. It's going to kill it. Not going to kill it. But I think that's where we're at. Gail, I mean, if you've got better info, let me know.
No. Did I turn that on or off? Is it on? Okay. The only thing that I would add, there are a couple things, is that the courts could say, there is a contract, but X. We want X done. They could send it back and say they want the IURC to review it.
If there's a contract.
If there's a contract. So that there's other scenarios.
But then you can't change it. The review standard mid-course.
That's right. You can't change the review standard, but if they could say we'll send it back with certain stipulations to be reviewed. And that is the scenario. And that's one thing that we have not done in the state legislature that I take issue with all the time, and that is the review on our contracts is for just and reasonable. And it's done with comparatives. There are just and reasonable contracts that have costs in them that are not affordable. Just and reasonable does not mean affordable. Therefore, I have said that we have got to increase the what shall I say, the guidelines that we give them to include affordable. And I don't think until we do that, it means a whole lot to go back to IURC, but it can go back. And what I'm going to try to do is to get the word out there that hopefully the courts will say, you've got to look at the affordability, and then you might have an issue. The other thing that we have to do is that the same folks who want review of this are the same folks, not here, but in Indianapolis, that will not put any state standards for regulation on fracking. And fracking for natural gas on the federal level is going to receive very few regulations. And unless we protect our state and set up set regulations for fracking of natural gas, then as far as I'm concerned, you aren't going to have the safest, most environmentally correct fracking measures in your own state. They've already been proven around the nation to be suspect, and we have to take accountability for what we do here in Indiana, and we're not willing to do that on the state level. So I see two things. We've got to define better what we want the IURC to do, and we have got to be able to stand up and say that regulations sometimes are not bad things. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just add that Senate Bill 510, hopefully if it passes the House, I guess it's on third reading, is it? It will go to a conference committee. Senator Doug Eckerty, sits by me on the floor of the Senate, and he wasn't real happy with what they did to his bill, but he didn't have any control over it. And I think, too, the clause that was put in there that says that the IURC has to review it by May 25th, I mean, we don't even adjourn until April the 29th. That doesn't give them any time to review that if you're serious about a review. So I think there's just a lot of concerns about that issue, and it'll continue to be a concern. But he's not happy. I think he started off with what he thought was a pretty good bill, and the Senate amended it down, and then the House has just pretty much obliterated it. One thing I will tell you about the process of this so-called standing, it's so that nobody has a recorded roll call on how they voted. It's done in the Senate occasionally, but all someone has to do in the House or the Senate is say, I want a roll call vote. And that way they are forced to take a roll call so that you know who voted for what. But nobody asked for that, evidently. We do it occasionally in the Senate. If somebody asks for a roll call, it has to be a roll call. If they don't, then it's just you stand, the ayes stand, the nays stand, and then they take a count. But it's not used very often.
Yeah, I just want to add too that I was on the committee on utilities where 510 come through, and I know that Lucchese was strictly opposed to this bill, and I think their word was that if they don't get what they were after, they won't come back again with this. There was a lot of controversy in this bill. The reason I thought it was a good measure was about the IURC, because that was the last stopgap that we was going to have on this measure. If it turned out to be an invalid contract, that we would have an ability to review it. Probably at the time that agreement was made, with prices what they were, it seemed like a good idea. But today, with the low natural gas prices, and it's not a good idea. And I got to tell you that the first and foremost for me on the merit of a bill like this is how it impacts our ratepayers. That's number one. And I made that announcement in the committee. I know, I just need to share with you that there's another side of this that we get bombarded with, and you guys got to know this. My perspective is when we start off with utility bills is how does it affect our ratepayers and our citizens? But then in this case, there's people that see this as a job builder, Spencer County, they see this as a construction jobs. So labor's got an interest in this thing. In that area, they see it as permanent jobs as well. And so that area of the state is looking at those permanent jobs. And I understand that. I do. And all the emails and the phone calls that we all get in regards to their viewpoint, we have to consider. And so these decisions don't come easy. But I got to share with you again that And I talk to the folks that come to me with that perspective. I understand their arguments. I understand their concerns. But in all of these measures, for me, the first and foremost, again, is what does it impact on our citizens? That has to come first. And I think most of our legislators view it from that perspective as well.
Thank you. All right. How about funding shortages for legal services? Connie Whitman has that question. She had to leave. Okay. Higher education and K-12 education and their impact on employment. A question from Sean O'Daniel. That's you. There we are.
Take one of these and pass it down if you don't mind. I'm going to help Mike out and just tell everybody, please turn off your cell phones or shift them to vibrate. They've created a couple of interruptions or distractions for the rest of the audience. I live in the district with Gail Rican. It's kind of a south side, and I live in the southeast side, and in that area of her district. I received a letter from her a while back discussing about some of the issues that she's really focused on in that from that district, one being income, household income, traditional public education, and poverty. And I think that probably those things involve something to do with single parent pregnancy and health matters, health bills involved with obesity. She mentioned at the bottom, yes, we are not making headway on single parent pregnancies, and we must do things differently. Some of the things that her survey came back as results is the most important thing is job creation, retention, and training programs, where 44% of her replies came back to being that's the most important thing, more importantly than higher education and K through 12 education funding. Higher education funding was only 9% responded as being the most important, and only 2% responded that public education was most important. But there, on the other hand, you must have higher education, and you must have terrific standards of education leading up to that higher education at the public level in order to attract employers to create the jobs. So we need to take that perspective on it. The people in this district are more interested in funding preschool and daycare than K through 12 education. And they're also, during the past 20 years, children born from unmarried parents has grown from 33% to 50%. And what I did is I passed on to the legislators here a perspective on that from a conservative, David Fromm of the Daily Beast, during his presentation during Face the Nation transcripts on March the 24th of 2013, when they were discussing same-sex marriage and foreign policy.
And do you have a question for the legislators?
Yes. What are your issues that you're going to deal with in the coming year involving single-parent pregnancy, causing a lot of poverty, and also obesity, creating a lot of medical bills, also leading to poverty?
Thank you. Want to start?
Well, Sean, I was looking at the letter here you gave us, and I appreciate your question. You know, there are some things, Sean, quite honestly, government can't fix. There are personal responsibilities in this country. You talk about single-parent families and obesity, and talk about drug addictions and, divorce rates, same-sex marriage we're talking about now. It's a hot-button issue at the federal level. There are issues that involve all of us and affect us. And what you pointed out was two of them. But at some point, folks, we can't keep coming to elected officials or a faceless government and say, we want you to fix this, when the only people that can fix what you're talking about are the people that I'm looking at. It's that simple. I wish there was a silver bullet. I wish we could snap our fingers and make the world right. But it doesn't work that way. It's individuals that have to make decisions for themselves. They're responsible for their actions. People that decide to live together and have babies and then split up, move on, and find another partner and have more babies. Government can't stop that. Government can't do anything about that. It's people that fail to accept the responsibilities of their own children. We see so many things in society where it was the failings of the individual, not being on the corrections committee. Some of the, and this year we just had House Bill 1006, which is a revamp of all the criminal code. 3 years this bill was in the making, 460 pages. The topics that we deal with in that measure was incredible. And it was an attempt for government to try to find a way of balancing. Who do you put in prison? How long do you put them there? What are the charges? We changed the felonies from A, B, C, and D to a 6-count felony, now 6 classes. But government is limited on how much it can do in our personal lives, and we want it to be limited. We don't want government to put a key in all of our backs and wind us up each day. But John, I appreciate what you're going after here, but quite honestly, it's citizens that have to take on some of the burden of obligations and responsibilities to conduct themselves.
Thanks.
One of the opportunities is, and I think an obligation, in being a representative, legislator on the local, state level, whatever level, is that you meet people, you network, you build relationships with people both in government but also outside of government. Obesity, or the problem of obesity, and how I intend to continue dealing with it, is probably one of those examples where you meet people, for instance, in Lilly, and you find out in Lilly is devoting a lot of their time, effort, and money into developing drugs for obesity and diabetes, especially in children. And you meet folks on a state level who are involved in the Minority Health Coalition, and you make that network with people locally, and you see that they both are interested in the same issue, and they're developing initiatives, and you put these people together, put them together with maybe a St. Mary's Hospital. That's happening right now. It's what I'm working on. So that yes, it is up to folks on a local level, but being at the state level, you develop. There's just one more opportunity to develop and to find ways to meet the needs that help people locally address those issues. So that's how I think that will be dealt with, as well as the State Department of Health is becoming more interested in setting up, guidelines and challenges for addressing the issue of obesity. Obesity is very costly. And I will never forget a comment made to me by Jenny O'Connor, who was very involved in that in the school system here locally before she retired. And they had done a survey of the kids in the middle school, I believe it was. And the kids in middle school were developing real signs for early, serious heart problems because of their weight. And I think this is something that, it's something that we all had better look at, because we were all going to be faced with that. And so anyway, that's how you do it. On the single parent, a lot of that I think that we need to deal with has to do with an issue that we're all working on now, and that has to do with young mothers who have been denied. A lot of them are single parent head of households, and we're driving buses and are working in cafeterias, and they've been denied their UI benefits for their summer. They're not working in the summer. And we're all working on that right now. So there are different ways that we can address those problems to help people help themselves.
I think, just a statistic for you, half of all babies born in the state of Indiana are born and paid for through Medicaid. And it costs the state about $68 million a year for many of those unintended pregnancies, and then you have all the cost and all the debilitating circumstances, you have child abuse for unintended pregnancies, you have kids in foster parents, in foster homes, or worse. And but unfortunately, government can't really solve all of that. I think Senator Toms is right. It has to start with responsibility with oneself. But it also, I think we do have to, one of the things that we've looked at over the years, and when you look at obesity, just a simple requirement of 30 minutes of exercise a day in schools would help. But we don't do that. We don't pass that bill because, quote, it's going to cost money and we're going to take kids away from academic performance to get exercise, when actually if they exercise, they learn better. Their brains are engaged better. So I think there is a movement to go in that direction, and we do have a lot of volunteer programs through schools. One of them is the Spark program. I don't know if any of you have heard about it, but and I just sent to both the Evansville-Vandenberg School Corporation and the Warwick County School Corporation. I had received from a corporation that is very concerned about childhood obesity, and they are giving grants to schools to do better on healthy eating and as well as exercise. And so I forwarded on to both of my local school corporations so that they can get in contact with those people, because they do make grants available. You know, if they jump rope, if they walk around the school, there are all kinds of things that schools are doing to try to improve physical activity for children, because they do recognize and they know that they learn better. One of the bills that I carried a few years ago was removing a lot of the soft drinks from vending machines and fat content, and we have done that. But unfortunately, that's not going to solve all the problems because kids go home and eat all that stuff anyway. But I don't think schools ought to be sanctioning it. So we still have a lot of work to be done, but I think it really requires a lot of education, awareness, and self-responsibility.
Thank you. I think Jim touched on a lot of it, talking about personal responsibility, so did Senator Becker. You know, as a lot of folks were speaking, I'm thinking back to when I was a child and how society has changed a great deal in just the 43 years that I've been alive. I think back to when I was a kid and learning to read. I'm sitting on my mom's lap and she's reading the Red Dog books to me. That doesn't happen as much anymore, and that's one of the key things in a family of poverty is typically if you have a parent that's working 2 to 3 jobs to try to support the family and the single parents, they don't have time to sit down and have the child on their lap and do that reading. And when that doesn't occur, that child becomes behind when they enter school. And that's a critical issue that we're dealing with. But I also fall to the side is we can't keep throwing money at problems and hoping that they'll change. And if we could solve poverty, we should have done it by now. We've consistently thrown money at poverty for centuries, and it just continues to get worse, in my opinion. That's just editorial. I'm sorry, but I think I'm thinking about the educational shift that takes place. From the 80s to the 90s, really there's a shift in the way that I believe teachers were trained. And a shift is in a response to a Nation at Risk that was done in the 80s and that sort of thing. But it used to be your schools were a lot like your homes. But there's a legal term called in loco parenta, which basically means in place of the parent. And you proud of me, Tom? And it was just to apply to legal circumstances. So like if a child, needed somebody to make sure they got from home to school and school to home, that they were protected. Now it's taken on much more meaning to shaping of the values of what you can and can't say or can and can't do when a child is in your classroom. There are things that you could say in a class in the 80s and 90s that you wouldn't want to say today for fear of what would happen next. Basically, schools have become the parent. Teachers have become the parent. And I don't know how we get back to a situation in which the parent returns to becoming the parent. And it starts with education, in my opinion, but it's as much an education of the parent as it is the child. And again, we can't keep throwing money at problems without parameters. And I would love to say that it's not government's place, and it isn't. But to some degree, we need to figure out a way, because we are entering an era for all of us, which scares the heck out of me, in which those of us who work are subsidizing those that don't. And at some point, those of us that work are finding that it's more advantageous for us not to work. And I'm afraid that will happen across the nation, and I don't know where we'll be after that. To address the obesity problem, I know I've gone over my 2 minutes, but you're just going to have to wait.
Unplug your microphone.
I believe obesity is a responsibility issue, but it's also a lifestyle commitment of a community. And if you look at those communities that have really spent their tax dollars and their monies towards promoting a common and healthy atmosphere, Evansville's on our way. Okay, we're just at the cusp of getting there. It's not going to happen overnight, because it's a total mindset, cultural change of what we need to do. But with the Greenway being completed, with the riverfront being a beautiful place to go walk, with the mayor that we have right now, encouraging healthy activities and walking on Saturdays, aesthetics actually mean a whole lot. If you want to be welcomed into a community and walk down beautiful shores, that is a first step in conquering any type of obesity, is to want to be out in the community and exercise. And we're just right at the beginning of that. And I would say if we continue down the same path of beautifying the city, creating areas in which you want to walk, and I highly recommend around USI and their trails, they're unbelievably beautiful. We can start to solve the problem in our own community, and then it just goes from there. Okay, Mike.
Thank you.
Go ahead. I had an aunt. She must have weighed 400 pounds. And she smoked all the time. She drank like a sailor. She's a very good card player. She keeled over in her 80s, died of a heart attack or something. I don't think she cost anybody a nickel. And, the thing is, we are so obsessed with each other that, if you want to be overweight, God love you. If you want to be skinny, God love you. But I will say, I don't want to pay for it. Okay? And that's where the problem is. Nobody in America should be concerned about each other unless you're stuck with their bill. So if we have individual responsibility and start taking care of our own bills, nobody will care what anybody does or not do. If we don't, we're going to get to the point where I can't buy a Mountain Dew because I got some chip in my rear end that tells the cash register that how much I weigh. I'm tired of the nanny state government commenting on people's weight or not on it. All right, got it off my chest, dear. Okay, but Sean, you raise a really interesting point that I've been struggling with ever since I went into Indianapolis about the pre-K and the preschool and the K-12. You said that I think your comment was that people were more concerned about the preschool and the pre-K than the K-12. And I have asked that question time and time again, and I've gotten wildly different responses from educators. Some of them say, fund the programs we have before you ever launch anything new. Some of them had said, we got to intervene early or everything you're doing later won't work. And I've heard both sides to it. Frankly, I don't have the answer for you, but I think you raise a very key thing, because right now there's a lot of talk about starting up some preschool and pre-K, but we haven't fully funded the education yet from where maybe the K-12 needs to be. We're making a big advance that direction, but it's just interesting. So I appreciate you raising the topic. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. Okay, let's move on to a question about city-county consolidation. House Bill 343, Roberta Hyman has that question.
Thank you. As I understand this bill, it would require that there be two separate votes, one by the county and one by the city, and both would have to pass it. And So here are my concerns about it. One is it's really not necessary at this point. You know, there was such an overwhelming defeat of it as a countywide vote that I'm curious why the legislature, with all the things you have to do, feel that this unnecessary bill was brought up. Secondly, it kind of undoes, though, one vote, you know, one vote thing. Every other kind of referendum we have, it's a countywide vote, and I wonder why this would be treated differently. It doesn't sound like good government when my vote wouldn't have the same weight as somebody else's vote. And then thirdly, as I read the newspaper this week, I was reminded that the adequate funding of essential local government services on both the county and the city level is just a ticking time bomb. Our revenues for county government they're coming in at 1.5 million less than hadn't been anticipated. So the county council is trying to figure out what to do about this. And here and throughout Indiana and across the country, cities and counties are struggling what to do. And one avenue that they have is to reorganize local government to make it more efficient. And that's what city-county consolidation, the theory of it at least, is about. They have, the city seems to have two options. One is to annex and bring in more revenue, and the other is to consolidate city-county government. And if you put in a provision of law that would make it virtually impossible to get approval countywide by having these separate votes, it seems to me, after studying this for 40 years, as a reporter I started writing about it in the late 60s and wrote about it and studied through this, that if you leave only the annexation option, you're doing a big disservice to the rural residents, because in annexation, if they're annexed, they have no voice in it. They immediately have to start paying for city services, whether they get those services or not. And then the city has X number of years to start providing those services, whether the people want them or not.
Roberta, you're one of the people who wrote the 2-minute policy.
But everybody else, I know I am, but they all took more than their 2 minutes. So I ask you to because this issue will come up again, not just here, but throughout Indiana, it's going to come up again. And why pass a law that isn't needed in the first place? Why do away with the one man, one vote equal, which is essential to our form of government? And why then do something that won't serve anybody well, especially those outside the city limits who want to have a voice?
Thanks. Okay. Now, given that that's one view on an issue, is there an opposing viewpoint? Somebody who supports? Yes, sir.
My name is Mel Dogan, and I do not support consolidation. Consolidation, the only thing is there that they want to come out to the county and take the money from the county residents that the city residents aren't getting charged for all their services. And we ain't going to get no extra services. So it's going to be bigger government reaching their hand into your pocket.
Okay, thank you. When did you want to? Okay.
You want me to?
Sure, go on, I'll follow up. Huh? Okay.
Gail's bill?
Gail's on the bill, that's true. It's not Gail's bill, but I am on the bill. And let me explain. I'll try to just be specific about the concerns that Roberta Hyman has mentioned here. First of all, the one person, one vote. I feel that the better opportunity for one person, one vote is to have the separate units decide themselves and then marry their votes if they are both positive. And that to me is truly representative of one person, one vote. And the reason is that if you take our county and our city, we can dominate in the city an entire vote. And I don't think that's fair to the folks who are outside of the county. So that's the one thing. I've held that from the very beginning. The other thing is the fiscal accountability. It really has not been it was not an absolute that we had a good fiscal accountability, fiscal piece in this last reorganization attempt. And I believe that this bill does have that opportunity. It would be written by someone who, by an entity that would not be connected to the particular reorganization that's going on. And it would show true efficiency or lack of efficiency. And that's one thing that when I heard in this last reorganization attempt, that it ended up being, well, we're not sure it really makes a whole lot of difference if it saves money. And I do think that if you're going to have a combination, that it truly has to be people coming together, one on equal levels, and it has to provide a sense of efficiency.
My comments weren't related at all to the proposal that was drafted and voted on. You know, it's specific provisions in that. I'm talking one man, one vote. That's the way things are always settled, you know, and the need for
this bill addresses those issues.
You know, I can't speak for the rest of the state, but it passed overwhelmingly. So people must have been concerned about it for their own locales and decided that policy the law needed to be changed to reflect the different parcels voting. I mean, maybe I don't think it's gonna come back down here at all. I yield to gentlelady time.
It comes up about every 10 years. It has since the late 1960s. It has.
Well, I think the vote though to actually do the annexation. I mean, that law came about rather recently, didn't it?
Proposal.
Let's just let the legislators weigh in here.
So, I take back my time. So, anyways, I think that down here, obviously, you can see kind of how that fell out in the last election on the subject. But I do think across the state, people were watching it and concerned about what would happen in their own areas. And were contacted by the people in the rural areas saying, hey, we can be overwhelmed by the municipalities near us. And I think that's what drove it. I don't think it was anything more than
that. Roberta, I just want to mention that I appreciate your concern about one person's one vote. The city had that option to give those county residents that single vote, and they chose not to. And so that's why we had this measure, because they weren't willing to give the county people the same equal vote that you seem to be concerned about. So now what we're doing is we are going to allow those county residents to have the ability to have their single vote, as you promote, and then they'll have the ability to either promote something or not. They have that chance. So this is a good measure, and I think it's equal and it's fair. The state doesn't like to micromanage local government. We just had a bill this week which would have done that with regard to the city and landlords, and I voted against that measure. But this here was an important measure, and this was another point where sometimes, even at the local levels, we have government that tries sometimes to be a little overbearing. And this was a chance for the state to step in and say, you're not going to treat some citizens differently than other ones. And so I think it was a good measure.
I think Jim hit on the one term that makes the most difference in this particular piece of legislation. That's the term fairness, because that's what you consistently heard from those folks who lived even in the city itself as to those who lived outside of the city, because it was just as much an important issue to them. And the one piece that Gail mentioned that I think is really the most important piece is the fiscal impact of whatever the potential reorganization might be. And that was missing as a requirement for any type of reorganization. And this also puts it back in the hands of the legislative body of the community. It takes it out of the hands of a reorganization committee, but it puts it into the local legislative leaders' hands in determining and creating something that the people of their community, they are accountable to. Just having a reorganization committee producing a plan doesn't make them accountable to anybody, but placing in the hands of a local elected legislative body makes accountability take place. And I think that those two keys, the fiscal impact and accountability, make it something that was easily supported across the state of Indiana. And there were 3 reorganization attempts this past year, and all of them failed. So it isn't necessarily a reaction to those, but it's a reaction to the word, I think, fairness.
I'll just say I agree with what's been said. I think most people just didn't. I think what Wendy said is accurate. It was a fairness issue. They didn't. People in some areas, the county is the largest entity. In some areas, geographically throughout the state, it's the smallest. So either way, there should be fairness, and I don't think that either one should be able to take over the other without enough of the people wanting it. Consolidation, the last time I recall it coming to a referendum was in 1974, before now. So that's more than about 30 years at least. So, and it saw the same results. And the majority of people, it wasn't just county people, that overwhelmingly the city was opposed to it as well, because I think they just didn't see fairness. And I think the fiscal was, if you're going to make a change, make it count for something. And I think most people attribute that to money. If you can do it so that it saves us money somewhere, they're going to be much more interested in the change. And I don't think that was demonstrated. In fact, toward the end, well, this may not save you money, but it'll be more efficient. Well, how? How do you determine that? So I think, the proponents, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your viewpoint, they didn't do a very good job selling it.
Well, we have just enough time to have about a minute from each legislator to cap off this 5-part series that we've had of Meet Your Legislator. We played a little fast and loose this time since it was our last one. But thank you all for coming, and I hope that you remain deeply involved in your government. And should we start again at this end? Does that work for you?
Sure, no pressure. Just want to thank everybody who's actually made it out to every meeting. I see a lot of familiar faces from the entire year. So thank you for taking your time on a Saturday morning to come out here and share your views and ask questions and be a part of the whole process. And thank you for those of you who've contacted the state government or come up to Indianapolis to testify or contact us on a regular basis. Your input is much appreciated. We're in the final stretch, the last 2 weeks, which will probably be, we'll need oxygen at the end and hopefully work on getting back into shape after that. But a lot will happen. A lot of the bills that you've seen come through will change a lot in the next 2 weeks. And a bill that started today might change tomorrow, because when it goes to conference committee, things can be put in, things can be taken out, things you might have disagreed with in the first place might find their way back. So be vigilant if there's a particular issue that you're got your mindset on, and make sure we know about it, because a lot of times we don't know until it's too late. So thank you again for participating, and even though session's done, we're still here. So if you need us outside of session, please don't hesitate to contact us.
We're all Americans, and it's one of the wonders of life that reasonable, intelligent, rational people can disagree on issues. And I really appreciate the thing about America is that here I am sitting in the legislature, and I can have citizens come to me on a Saturday and get right in my face and say, you're an idiot, or you're just not doing your job, or you're way off on this. And I can say back to them, well, vice versa, etc. And we can walk away from this place all the better for it. And I just thank God we live in a country where we aren't pulling out guns and shooting each other over it, or warring. We are really blessed. And so when people get emotional or they get passionate and they're on the opposite side of it, I actually find it refreshing, because it says people still care. And as long as we keep caring, Well, we've slugged this thing out for 200 years plus. We're going to keep slugging it out, and it'll go this way and that way, but we're going to be here. But when we stop caring, it's going to end. And so thank you all for coming out.
We have, as everyone tells me, I think some of the most productive discussions. When I listen to others in the legislature and how their town halls go, it really is an interchange here and an exchange of ideas and opinions, and I really do appreciate it. We depend on that diversity, and everybody has a different take. And even when I listen to folks up here talk about something, it's not necessarily what I hear from them on the floor, and it has been very beneficial over these last few years. I read an opinion letter from Bob Jones in the paper that came out this last week, saying how neat we were because other people were saying that we were possibly not the community of choice. But just to echo again what has been said here by both Senator Becker and Representative McNamara, not only did we have Michael Lockhart and Ben Trockman and Matt Bernhardt, but we had folks coming up on the reorganization. We'd be lost without them. Folks who came up on precious metals. This was on the We Buy Gold and really making a difference. And it was the police that came up. The firefighters and the police have both been up there. Midwifery, that has been an issue before the legislature. And Dr. Del Rio from here. Few people don't know that she's been a leader across the state. We have folks that take leadership. How many times have you been up, Carol Davis? I don't know. We depend on you all being involved locally and on the state level. And I want to tell you, all are leaders. Things are happening on the meth level because you all have spoken out. And I really, really appreciate it. We can orchestrate, but we can't sell the story. It's you all. It's about everyone in our community, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you. We have a summer. We've got issues that we're going to be dealing with and want to hear from you. So I thank you very much.
And over to our senators.
I'll just add I know we're running out of time. I'll add my thank you because as I've said many, many times, I think we as your representatives in both the House and the Senate do a much better job representing you when we can hear from the people who we represent. I think it's critically important, and I appreciate your input very, very much. And thank you for coming.
And I too want to thank everybody that made these events possible. I appreciate it. I want to mention I have brochures out here. Please take some home with you, read them. I appreciate that very much. Again, I want to illustrate, and I'll be very brief. I understand we're time constrained here, but why state government, in my estimation, is a vital government, more so, I think, sometimes than local and federal, because that's the element of government that sometimes brings a check and balance to a federal government or local. And I just want to point out, as I said, the bill that we had, it was a House Bill 1579. I want to just point out what happens when the federal government decides to extort and strong-arm its citizens. In 1992, we passed a law in this state about open container. And that law's been fine for 21 years, not a problem. The federal government recently has notified 19 states that they don't approve of what they have. They've decided they know better than what our state legislators and our citizens know. And what they did here in Indiana is they notified NDOT that unless we were willing to change our penalties on open container laws and make them more strong and more stringent and put more people in jail or fine them steeper, they were going to withhold $40 million of federal highway funding. Now the House bill caved in, and it was agreeable to this. They bumped the hours of community service up and prison time or jail time. When that bill came to the Senate, and NDOT came to my office and she talked to me about this because they were concerned about the loss of $40 million. We are too. But I told them, I said, I appreciate that, but I am not going to continue to sacrifice our citizens up for this blackmailing of federal government. And so we changed that back to its original language and put it right back where it was. There was one little aspect that was a flaw in the way it was written about and this is concerning motorhomes and RVs and chauffeurs of limousines and things, the operator of the vehicle. And so we changed that language, which now allows the NDOT to get this $20 million of their $40 million. But the other part of making it stronger and stricter was out of the questions. The hours they want citizens to put in community service, a working person could never do that. And so we changed it back, and the Attorney General's on board with us on this. It may come down to a face-off with the federal government. No one in the state wants to lose our own money back. But you guys have to understand, at some point, you better hope you got some legislators who's willing to step in the way of federal government and stop them from strong-arming our citizens, whatever the law might be. So I just want to share it with you. Thank you.
Again, thank you all for coming, and thanks to the organizers of this event, and have a wonderful rest of the month. Thank you.